Etymology and historical origin of the baby name Elizabeth. The name Elizabeth in its various linguistic forms has been around since the Middle Ages, mainly popularized by the French, using the spelling Elizabeth. Elizabeth with a Z is the typical English spelling. Most other European languages use the S. Elizabeth is a name born from the Bible, Luke 1 verses 5 to 80, as the wife of Zachariah and the mother of John the Baptist. The name is essentially Greek, Elizabeth, from the Hebrew, Elisheva, meaning God is my oath. In the biblical story, we learn that God looks favorably upon Zachariah and Elizabeth as they were both righteous before God, but they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. Luke 1 verse 6. The angel Gabriel is sent to Zachariah with a message that Elizabeth will have a son, and you shall call his name John. Gabriel also says that John's birth will be cause for much rejoicing and that the baby will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from Elizabeth's womb. Zachariah expressed disbelief since his wife was well past childbearing years. As punishment for his doubt, God struck Zachariah mute. Sure enough, Elizabeth became pregnant and gave birth to John, after which Zachariah's voice was restored. Around the same time, Mary became impregnated by the Holy Ghost with Jesus. Mary and Elizabeth are contemporaries. Tradition holds they are cousins. John the Baptist's role is important because it will later become his job to prepare the people for the coming of the Messiah, the knowledge of salvation and the forgiveness of sins because of the tender mercy of our God. Luke 1 verse 78. And John the Baptist also has the honors of having baptized Jesus in the River Jordan. In other words, John was one important biblical dude among Christians and Elizabeth was the baby mama. It's no surprise that the biblical Elizabeth became the inspiration behind the usage of her name, and why so many Christianized European countries embraced it since the early Middle Ages. Her feast day is November 5th. The much-admired Saints Elizabeth of Hungary and Elizabeth of Portugal also encouraged the usage of Elizabeth in later medieval times, further cementing the name's lasting popularity. Elizabeth is up there with Mary, Margaret and Catherine as a long-enduring and enormously popular female name, names which have also spawned scores of variations and pet forms. Here is how Elizabeth is rendered in some other languages: Elisheba, Biblical Hebrew, Elizabeth, French, Elisabeth, Greek, Elikapika, Hawaiian, Elise, Irish Gaelic, Elisabetta, Italian, Elzbieta, Polish, Elisabetta, Russian, Elizabeth, Scandinavian, Elspeth, Scottish, Isabel, Spanish, Elsa, Swedish. Personality of the girl name Elizabeth. The number 7 personality is deeply mystical and highly in tune with their spirituality. They operate on a different wavelength than the average Joe. Spending time alone comes easily to 7s, as it gives them time to contemplate philosophical, religious, and spiritual ideas in an effort to find real truth. 7s are wise, but often exude mystery as if they are tapped into something the rest of us don't understand. They love the outdoors and are fed by nature. 7s are constantly seeking to understand human nature, our place in the universe, and the mystery of life in general. This makes them quite artistic and poetic, but they are also keen observers with high intellect, so they are equally scientific-minded. 7s are charitable and care deeply about the human condition. Popularity of the girl name Elizabeth. Elizabeth has maintained top positions on the popularity charts in America since the colonies were founded, having been brought over from England. In fact, back then, the name was so prolific in England, many pet forms were fashioned in order to differentiate the many Elizabeths. You'd be hard-pressed to find a name with so many derivations, pet forms and nicknames. This is part of the name's elasticity and charm. There are so many variations of the name to fit any personality, making it an extremely flexible choice. Elizabeth has averaged in the top 10 most popular names for girls for over a century, therefore making it a classical choice rather than a trendy one. It should be noted, however, that the Latinate or Spanish version of the name, Isabella, has become a favored girl's name over Elizabeth in recent years. Quick facts on Elizabeth. Gender, girl. Origin, English. Number of syllables, 4. Ranking popularity, 10. Pronunciation, Elizabeth. Simple meaning, God is my oath. Characteristics of Elizabeth. Eccentric, mystical, solitary, wise, intuitive, philosophical, imaginative. Cultural references to the baby name Elizabeth. Literary characters of the baby name Elizabeth. Elizabeth Elliot is a character in Jane Austen's 1817 novel, Persuasion. She is the snobbish and self-absorbed oldest of the three Elliot sisters, quite naturally the favorite of her equally snobbish widower father. He and she have already worked against Anne's interests by persuading her not to marry for love alone. Elizabeth cares only for name and status, and she is determined to make a suitable match for herself. To that end, she sets her sights on her relative, Mr. Elliot, who will inherit her father's property. Suitable he would be, however, Mr. Elliot is as vain and self-centered as Elizabeth is, and his main focus is on protecting that inheritance. Poor Elizabeth, at tale's end she is staring spinsterhood in the face, there being no one to match her qualifications. Elizabeth Proctor is a character in Arthur Miller's 1953 play about the Salem witch trials, and the McCarthy Red Hunt, The Crucible. Long-suffering and God-fearing, Elizabeth has apparently drawn a bad hand. Married to John Proctor, she is the innocent victim of his spurned lover's revenge and hatred, the despicable Abigail Williams. Elizabeth truly does love her husband, she is also rightfully righteous when she learns of the affair between him and Abigail. Elizabeth is virtuous, and struggles with her natural bent toward anger and revenge. Tainted by the vitriol that Abigail spews, poor, pregnant Elizabeth must spend time in jail, falsely accused, before being released. During this time, Elizabeth examines her own conscience and admits to the coldness in her own heart that may have driven her husband astray. Ultimately, she comes to her husband's defense, and provides for him the greatest gift of all, forgiveness, and the ability to let him go to his death unburdened by guilt. Well, it was the greatest gift of all in Puritan times, anyway. We're not sure Elizabeth's Latter-day Sisters would be so kind. Elizabeth Bennet is the protagonist of Jane Austen's 1813 classic, Pride and Prejudice, and one of literature's most beloved heroines. Second of 5 girls in the Bennet family, Elizabeth is independent, witty, and highly intelligent. She did not get this from her mother, the silly Mrs. Bennet, who spends all her time shrilly and shrewdly trying to find husbands for her daughters, as their estate will be entailed to a male relative. Enter the brooding Mr. Darcy, mix in all the social proprieties of the early 19th century, including a healthy dose of snobbishness and stubbornness, and you have a surefire recipe for romantic mayhem. Elizabeth is up to the task, verbally fencing with Mr. Darcy, spiritedly defending her crew of sisters and squaring off against the redoubtable Lady de Bourgh. Love triumphs over all in the end, and Elizabeth goes off with her handily won husband, leaving generations of girls to come inspired and encouraged. Elizabeth Beth March is one of the sisters in Louisa May Alcott's beloved American novel, Little Women, 1868. Beth is the third of 4 March sisters. She is angelic and shy, and very much concerned with keeping the family together. Saintly and innocent in her ways, Beth is the one sister who conflicts with the harshness of reality in the novel. Popular songs on Elizabeth. Elizabeth My Dear, a song by Ryan Adams, a song by Ringo Starr, a song by the Stone Roses, a song by Michael Jackson. Elizabeth, I Love You, in memory of Elizabeth Reed. Elizabeth, You Were Born to Play That Part, a song by the Allman Brothers. Elizabeth Reigns. Famous people named Elizabeth. Elizabeth Banks, actress, Elizabeth Hurley, actress, Elizabeth Ford, First Lady, Elizabeth Berkley, actress, Elizabeth McGovern, actress, Elizabeth Montgomery, actress, Elizabeth Taylor, actress, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, poet, Elizabeth Perkins, actress. Historic figures with the name Elizabeth. In the New Testament and the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 1, Elizabeth is introduced as the mother of John the Baptist. Not much information is known about Elizabeth, but she has the distinction of being one of the first to know about her cousin Mary's blessing as the Mother of God. Elizabeth was beyond childbearing age, yet her husband Zachary was told by an angel in a vision that they would have a son and should name him John. When he doubted this, he was struck dumb. After John's birth, Zachary's speech was restored. Elizabetha's feast day is November 5. Elizabeth II began her reign in 1952, and is a couple years shy from serving the longest reign in British monarch history. Queen Victoria served for 64 years. As the eldest daughter of King George VI, she became queen upon his death. It was quite by happenstance that young Elizabeth would eventually be queen. Her father was actually the second in line, after his older brother, Edward, who would relinquish the throne in order to marry his great love, the American socialite and, Dvorka copyrightee, Wallis Simpson. While mainly a figurehead of the United Kingdom, the throne persists and Elizabeth still commands much love and respect of the British people despite the many ups and downs of her family in modern times. Elizabeth Seton has the distinction of being the first native-born American to be canonized a saint. She was born into a well-to-do family and married well and happy herself. Unfortunately, through a series of events, Elizabetha's life was struck by one tragedy after another. She eventually made her way to Italy, where she became enamored by the Catholic Church and promptly became a devout member. Coming back to America, she founded the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph to serve the poor children of Baltimore, Maryland. Bonnie Parker was the celebrated girlfriend of Clyde Barrow, and with him and his gang, participated in a rampage of robbery and murder between 1931 and 1934. Born in Texas, Bonnie, her two siblings, and her widowed mother lived with her maternal grandparents. They were reasonably well off and Bonnie was a good student in school. Before her 16th birthday, however, she dropped out of school and married her boyfriend. The union was short-lived, though never officially dissolved, and Bonnie was working as a waitress when she met Clyde Barrow. She was immediately smitten with him and joined him and his gang without looking back. Without looking much forward, either. Bonnie was 24 years old when she and Clyde died together in a shootout by a police posse, and moved on into legend, helped in no small way by the 1967 portrayal of her by Faye Dunaway in the movie, Bonnie and Clyde, also known as St. Elizabeth of Aragon. This Elizabeth was another popular saint of the Middle Ages. She was a Spanish princess who was betrothed to King Denis of Portugal at the ripe old age of 12. A beautiful, kind and devoutly religious woman, the king tired of her soon enough and began to cause her great suffering. The story goes that the king was told an untrue rumor about one of his wife's pages, a low-ranking servant in royal court, and so conspired to kill him. The page stopped for mass on his way to his unknown death. As a result of this delay, the Abada page, the one who started the rumor in the first place, was mistakenly put to death by furnace in the good Pagia's place. Are you following us? When the king got wind of this situation, he realized that God had saved the good page for stopping at mass, and saw the errors of his ways. This amazing event guided the king into a more pious life, and he and Elizabeth went on to live out their marriage happily. Her feast day is July 4. Everyone loved Queen Elizabeth I, who reigned England from 1558 to her death in 1603. The daughter of Henry VIII, Elizabeth Tudor, survived a perilous childhood which included the beheading of her mother and Boleyn. This obviously affected the young girl, who stayed steadfast independent and would never marry herself. During her reign, England prospered. It was a time of peace. She ended the war with France and whipped the Spanish Armada. But most notably, it was the golden era of literature, drama, and the arts. Shakespeare was writing prolifically during this time. Married to the poet Robert Browning, Elizabeth Barrett was a very accomplished poet in her own right. She wrote during the Victorian era and was extremely popular in both her native England and America. Having suffered a spinal injury at a young age, Elizabeth dedicated most of her time to writing poetry indoors. Robert Browning wrote to her in admiration of her work, and they soon struck up a friendship which resulted in a proposal. Since Elizabetha's father disapproved, the two young lovers ran away to Italy where her health greatly improved. Much of her famous poetry was written about her growing love for Robert. She is most famous for the poem, A Euro How Do I Love Thee? Let me count the ways a euro, st. Elizabeth was born into a privileged life in Hungary in 1207 a euro. She was the daughter of the king. A very piteous young girl, she was betrothed to Louis of Thuringia a euro, who fortunately was inclined to religion himself and held Elizabeth in high regard for her devotion. He encouraged her virtuous and exemplary life, which made for a very happy marriage. Until tragedy struck and Louis was killed while battling the Crusaders. After his death, she renounced the world and became dedicated to tending to the sick. St. Elizabeth only lived to be 24. She is thus the patron saint of widows and young brides. Her feast day is November 19th.